This is the most beautiful place on earth. I first encountered that line, I first read it back in 1968 in a book written by Edward Abbey called Desert Solitaire, A Season in the Wilderness. I knew what Abbey was talking about because I grew up in western Pennsylvania, the Appalachian Mountains, the oldest mountain range in North America. Beautiful, tall, steep hills, crowned with green hickory and maple trees. The understory, red and white and blue and yellow with dogwood and mountain laurel, redbud, and a million flowers. It was the most beautiful place on the earth. All those beautiful, tall, steep mountains, at their bases ran rivers that had been polluted for 100 years by the coal mines that riddled the land beneath. Those coal mines made the rivers run orange and blue and dead. Wildlife skirted it. It's a dead zone. I grew up on the edge of an industrial town. I could walk out my back door up the hill into deep forest. I could find squirrel and rabbit and deer. But if I wanted to go fishing, I needed to find an adult, drive me 20 miles in a car, find water clean enough for fish to live in. And my daddy didn't own a car. So after college, I left that country, like Edward Abbey did. He grew up not far from where I did. And I headed to a place that I'd always dreamed about. And that was right here, state of Maine. Settled in a small coastal town, my wife and I. And in that town, it was beautiful. At one end of the town, the east, was the ocean, had gorgeous white sand beaches. Great surf. Marshes, deep blue in the noonday sun, water. And the other side of town, the west side of town, was undeveloped. It was forest land, oaks, pine. Rivers running through it were not polluted and dead. They were clean. They were filled with fish, wildlife everywhere. I spent a lot of time in that country after I moved here. Picked my fishing rod out, fished brook trout, did a little gunning for rabbit. Most of the time, I just wanted to be out there wandering around. And truth to be told, I was in graduate school, and a lot of days I spent more time out in the fields and streams than I spent in my graduate studies. It was clear to me this was the most beautiful place on the earth. But it wasn't perfect. The beaches in my coastal town, they'd been largely developed, not all of them, but mostly developed, and that meant that their value for wildlife was gone, mostly gone. Nonetheless, it was gorgeous. And I thought about, as I walked around in this paradise of a beautiful place, I thought about Pennsylvania occasionally. And I had this chilling thought, sometimes it could happen here that things could go bad. As I had that thought, sometimes out deep in the woods, I would remember another line that, from back in the 1960s, went like this: ground you're standing on is liberated territory. Defend it with your life. That was kind of originally aimed at peace demonstrations. There was a beach in the town that was quite undeveloped. It was a refuge for the wildlife that had been squeezed out east and west from the other beaches that had been developed. It was gorgeous, wild. The river that ran down to that beach ran riot across the marsh, zigzag, zigzag, zigzagged. It was one of the few rivers never been straightened by the settlers who wanted to have a quick run down to the ocean, move their cargo. Along that river was a diversity of wild animals that you just couldn't believe. Here in settled southern Maine, there were fisher cat, there was bobcat, there were hawks and owls, occasional eagle. It was a wild place. But there's a problem there too, because that beach was slated to be developed into a state park. Now, I generally like parks. It's part of my line of work. But this state park was going to bring a parking lot with 300 vehicles right to the edge of this pristine beach. And it's going to bring probably that many people a lot of good days, And that would be the end of the wildlife there, by and large. There were lots of other beaches nearby that people could drive to and access, but nonetheless, this beach was going to be developed too. Now, above that beach, on the top of the hill, was a old saltwater farm, what we call in Maine, of several hundred acres. It was old. It dated back to colonial times. Some of the buildings dated back to the early 1700s. And about this time, we found that farm was up for sale. The heirs could not pay the taxes, and it was going to be for sale. And given the price of it, which was well over $1 million, which was a lot of money then, it looked like the only buyer was going to be an outfit called IT&T, a big corporation who had designs on this land to be a corporate playground. They were going to build hurricane fences with barbed wire, helicopter port for their executives internationally. Some of you might remember IT&T were the people who were cited for illegal campaign contributions to the Richard Nixon campaign. Some people in the town, ordinary people, some of my neighbors, they got together and they said, let's find a way to keep this farm intact. Let's keep it so that the community can access it the way people had accessed it for generations. Sometimes helping with haying, sometimes going there to buy food. They began a movement. They started out just passing the cap in my neighbor's kitchen. Got $20 for postage. That's how it began. So I joined up. I had a very small part to play. I worked on a committee to look for a way to protect that farm by making it into a estuarine sanctuary. The farm, the river, the beach, this river was pristine. We found that the federal government would contribute money to keep this river system a pristine river system so that scientists could study what it's supposed to be like and use that as a baseline to compare with polluted river systems everywhere else. So I did that. I joined that committee, worked at it with a bunch of good people, and I did something else that was kind of unlikely for me. I joined the town government. I found that there was possibility for a conservation commission in the town. It was defunct, nobody did it, and I thought, well, let's do it. And I say it's a little odd for me because I'd spent, several years carrying signs around, basically just trusting the government and disagreeing with over their war policies. So I did. I and some like-minded people, we restarted the Conservation Commission and we immediately began to lobby in favor of this sanctuary and opposed to the state park, because we couldn't have both. The state park was not compatible. It would drive the wildlife away, it would impact the water. Well, opposing the state park had a little consequence, especially after we wrote the governor. I can't remember if we said we would put our bodies in front of the bulldozers or anything like that. It's a long time ago, doesn't matter. But we got the attention of those who thought the state park meant a lot of money. And they went to the selectmen, who were my bosses, and one night, a crowd of them, and they demanded that the Conservation Commission be disbanded. So I read about this one day in the York County Coast-Star. I was on my way home from work, pick up a newspaper, and I see this headline that says, "Angry mob demands the ouster of town official." And I thought, what poor bastard they have this time, And I read that a little bit more. It was me, okay? Jeez. There's a pull quote that said, "We need someone to rid us of this meddling environmentalist." About that time, I started looking in the back seat, like, see if there's anybody in there. But we went to the selectmen. I found a kind of fine point of law that they were unaware of about conservation commissions. I pointed it out to them politely. They reacted politely. So we didn't get fired. We didn't get dismissed. In fact, we won. We stayed in business. People raising the money raised $750,000. A lot of it from donations of $20 or less. Federal government matched that. And over a period of years, the farm, the river, the beach became part of a estuarine sanctuary, and it is now called the Wells National Estuarine Research Reserve, and I heartily recommend that you visit it. Now, the Conservation Commission, after that was done, we looked around, what else are we going to do? Well, we looked to the wild parts of town, which were the west, and at this time we noticed that they were under a siege of development. People building houses, mini malls, shops, and this had consequences. Rivers, people were building too close to water courses, rivers were being filled with silt. The animals, fewer places to live, fewer places to cross roads. So we began to go to the regulatory boards, and we would testify. We would do our research, and we would say, well, this project as it's designed will have a negative impact. Move this project 100 feet away from the water. And we did this for several years, those kinds of suggestions. After several years, we saw a pattern. Not a single suggestion we ever made to a regulatory board was acted upon. They would listen, sometimes they would listen, and they would look at the letter of the law, and they would say this meets the letter of the law, and they would move forward. So we got a little discouraged, so we decided we would try something else. We recalled what we heard one man say at a hearing, which was, if you want to tell me what to do with my land, then pay me for it. And we thought, well, you know, how can we do that? Where do we get the money? We thought, well, let's go to the federal government, get the money, get a grant, buy a bunch of land. Well, things weren't that much different then than now. Sometimes not everybody really trusted the federal government that much. I had some sympathy for that because I hadn't trusted them for a long time. But I certainly trusted them to spend money to preserve pristine watercourses. So we thought of something else, which was an old Yankee saying about money. New Englanders have a lot of clever things to say about money, right? And this one was, you get what you pay for. You pay for what you get. What that means is, what you pay for, you value. We weren't interested simply in preserving land right now. We also realized from that preservation of that saltwater farm, when people paid for something, they valued it. Over the long term, they would value it if they paid for it. So we went to the selectmen with a plan. We said, we want you to ask the townspeople at the town meeting if they will vote tax money into a fund, which we call the land bank. And that fund, when it accrues, we will buy some of the most ecologically significant, beautiful pieces of land. Selectmen were not wild about the idea back in 1984. But they put it on the ballot. I think they thought it would just get shot down entirely. But when it came to the town meeting, people voted overwhelmingly to do the land bank and voted money into it right away. After that, year after that, sums got larger and larger every year. At the town meeting, when this warrant item came up, it passed overwhelmingly. You know, show of hands. Sometimes unanimously. Nobody voted against it. It was tax dollars. You know, you vote unanimously, you spend money. It's kind of a rare thing. Somebody doesn't have something bad to say. As time went on, we realized that we had to meet a variety of needs in the community. Our concern was wildlife habitat, rare and endangered species, healthy ecosystem. One of the things we did was we commissioned some expert biologists help us create a ranking system so that we could show we considered things like wildlife habitat, diversity of habitat, rare species, but we also put in our ranking system things like opportunities for outdoor recreation for the community. We put in there scenic vistas to be preserved so that people drove around the roads, they had beautiful places to see. Just what people value. We borrowed from people smarter than us. That's always a good thing to do. One of them was this guy, whom we've all heard of, Henry Thoreau. He wrote, "I think that each town should have a park, or rather a primitive forest of 500 or 1,000 acres, either in one body or several, where a stick should never be cut for fuel, nor for the navy, nor to make wagons, but stand and decay for higher uses. Common possession forever for instruction and recreation." We put that around, put it in the town report. So we carried on. We tried to meet the community's needs and interest. We preserved beautiful stream, brook trout fishery. And it wasn't just a beautiful stream we preserved, but we preserved vestiges of a dam that dated back at least 2 centuries. So people might not be entirely interested in the brook trout, but a lot of people were interested in the environmental history of where we live, what it was like to live there in the past. We designed a easy walk trail that skirted a beaver lodge. So parents could take their kiddos out and find evidence of that beaver without chasing through the woods all day. If you look across the river, can't see it from here, but Beaver Lodge is about 12 feet tall. Old folks could take that trail, we smoothed it out so older people would be able to have a safe walk. And then we had this other idea. We acquired a very large parcel of property, and we decided to use, with a local land trust called the Great Works Regional Land Trust. With them, we bought a big piece of land and we decided to use some of it to restore, to create habitat for a species here in Maine that's going extinct. It is called New England cottontail. There's about 300 of these rabbits left in Maine. Now, if you look at that photograph, that was the easiest sell ever. And in fact, when a warrant item came up, you can see that date. That is the absolute depth of the Great Recession. It was a time when everybody was afraid of money everywhere. Nobody wanted to spend anything, in government or otherwise. We took 67% of the vote. How did we do overall over a long span of time? Well, we did okay. There's always more to do. There's a map of the western part of town. It's an aerial. You can see water courses in blue and the trees. You can see roads, houses. When we started, that's what it looked like in terms of what the town owned for land that would be protected into the future. It's what it looks like now. And it's actually, they're not all up there. That map's a little bit dated. Thousands of acres we've conserved. We're looking now to make connections for wildlife and for humans to travel on corridors between those patches of land, particularly the bunnies. Bunnies got to get from one place to another and make more bunnies, if you know what I mean. It's not as simple as we sometimes think for the bunnies. What else did we do? We worked on a whole lot of projects. Oh yeah, by the way, you remember that river I showed you from my hometown? It was the sewage system in town when I was a boy. While I was in Maine trying to work on the most beautiful place on earth, people were back at my hometown trying to restore the most beautiful river on earth. And that river is the same river that flowed through my town. You see those kayakers just become a recreational destination. There's a weekend in May when there'll be so many boats going down that river. Somebody else was there while I was here. And this is the quote that we began with. It's the most beautiful place on earth. I went from being a person who, here in this beautiful place in Maine, felt a little bit like an outsider. I hadn't been born here. I went from that to being belonging to the community. I've been a town official for 34 years. So I went from being a kind of bitter guy who saw all that development, everything disappearing, the wild places I loved, beginning to think that, as Wendell Berry, the poet, said, that he said, praise ignorance, what humans have not encountered, they have not destroyed. I was beginning to think like that. And after a while, I began to think a little differently. I began to think that the wild animals, the wild nature herself, and humans, we all belong. Humans aren't going anywhere. In fact, if anybody does anything for the future, it's going to have to be humans. Those bunny rabbits are cute, but they don't do good planning. And along that line, we, the group of us, we began to think a little bit differently about our mission. We went from being people who simply want to preserve wild places to being community conservationists. We began to think about the overall needs of the community. So we called our conservation lands wildlife commons, building on the old New England idea of a commons, people sharing, belong to everybody, and including in it animals. Animals are part of the community. And we began to look at other things. We began to look at farmland, agricultural land. Our most recent project, we purchased an agricultural easement on the second largest farm in town, which meant that that land will be forever preserved as a source of food for people. We will be able to feed the people in our town. Our topic for this TED Talk is ways of the future, and I've been talking about the past, so what about the future? Well, the future is this. When Ed Abbey wrote those words, he didn't stop right there. That's the first line of his book. The second line of his book was this. This is the most beautiful place on earth. There are many such places. The most beautiful place on earth, my friends, each of you knows a most beautiful place. You know the most beautiful place on the earth. Maybe where you grew up, maybe out your kitchen window. If you spend some of your life defending the most beautiful place on earth, you will have, if you're lucky, the same experience I've had. Because doing that has enriched my life immeasurably. It has. I think you'll find the same. Thank you.